Rickie Collins is set to make his first collegiate start against an opponent that he should be able to handle. Plus, the ACC moved to a 9-game conference schedule. What this means for Syracuse football moving forward.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, yesterday it was reported that the ACC is moving to a 9-game conference schedule. What this means for Syracuse football moving forward, we'll talk about that later on in the show. Plus, we'll go over the Duke offense and the challenge that lies ahead for the Syracuse defense. But we start this podcast talking about how Rickie Collins, the new starting quarterback of Syracuse football, is set to make his first ever collegiate start against a defense in Duke that should be pretty gettable on Saturday. All that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Syracuse football gets set to take on Duke this Saturday inside the JMA Wireless Dome at noon Eastern. And as I've already said a number of times on this podcast, Rickie Collins is making his first ever collegiate start. Yes, he has appeared in some games, whether it's at LSU or in a couple of games here already at Syracuse against Colgate and filling in the fourth quarter against Clemson when Steve Angeli got injured. But this is his first career start. And the good news for Rickie Collins is that this is a Duke defense that is gettable. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's an easy defense. They don't have any good players. We should totally discount them, totally disrespect them. No. This is still an ACC opponent, and we'll go over a couple of difference makers on that Duke defense that we need to keep an eye on, and especially Rickie Collins needs to keep an eye on. But that being said, of ACC defenses, Duke has not exactly been great at stopping the run or stopping the pass, which are really the only two aspects of a defense. Here are the stats for you for Duke. Just a general overview of this defense, okay? Total yards, they allow 414 a game. That is 14th in the ACC. Rushing yards allowed, 153 a game. That is 14th. Pass yards, 260 a game. That's 13th in the ACC. And scoring, they allow 32 points a game. That is last in the conference so far in the early going of 2025. Let's talk about the rushing aspect of this first. And I think Syracuse football in this game should be able to run the football against this Duke defense. Last week, NC State's Hollywood Smothers, their running back, he ran for 123 yards on over 7 yards a carry. But what's really interesting is the fact that a couple of quarterbacks already on Duke against Duke, have been able to accumulate a lot of rushing yards. Now, to Duke's credit, last week, C.J. Bailey only ran for 9 yards against this Duke defense. But as we just said, with Hollywood Smothers, they were able to get it going with their running backs rather than their quarterbacks. So if you're Syracuse, this is a game where you can really lean into Rickie Collins' mobility. I'm not going to sit here and say Rickie Collins is Mike Vick, but he is pretty mobile, and we know that he can use his legs, and we know he is a pretty good athlete. This could be the type of game where we see that mobility in action. And if Duke is somehow able to contain Rickie Collins' legs, well, then they still got to worry about Yassine Willis and Will Nixon running downhill on them. So this is a game where I look at for Syracuse and say, just like you did against Clemson in the early going, where they established a running game, I think they should be able to do that against this Duke defense. And if they can do that, which is a big if, it's not going to necessarily be easy, even though this Duke defense is gettable. If they can do that, this could really open up Syracuse's passing attack. And you really want to do that, especially with a backup quarterback making their first ever collegiate start. Cannot stress that enough for Rickie Collins. From a passing angle, again, the main key is establishing a run in this game, which we'll dive deeper into later on this week. But that's one of the big keys. If Duke can somehow manage to stop the run of Syracuse football, force Rickie Collins into second and third and long situations, that could be trouble for Syracuse football. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that we were going to go over a couple of players on Duke that you definitely need to be aware of in this game. A couple of standouts, if you will. And look, we don't have all day, so I'm not going to sit here and go through their entire roster. So just a couple of standouts for you. First, a senior cornerback by the name of Chandler Rivers. This is someone that is definitely going to be playing on Sundays. Okay? Let's just throw it out there. He is an NFL talent right now. I checked a couple of mock drafts. I see this guy based on the mock drafts that I'm looking at online, which granted are not perfect. Maybe you found differently. Have him as a second, third round pick. So this is not just someone who is an NFL talent. This is someone who could be potentially starting NFL games as soon as 2026. He was a 2025 preseason All-American, preseason All-ACC, 2024 All-American, first team All-ACC. Throwing his way, probably not a good idea if you are Syracuse football, but the good news for Syracuse football is we have talked about it plenty of times on this show already. They got plenty of weapons. So if you see that Justice Ross Simmons is lined up one-on-one against Chandler Rivers, okay, well, they might not be able to throw to Justice Ross Simmons on that play. Well, Jonte Cook could be available one-on-one, right? Or any of the other weapons that Syracuse football does have at its disposal. But that's one player to definitely keep an eye on, a standout in Chandler Rivers at cornerback. Number two, a senior defensive end, a pass rusher in Vincent Anthony. He is having a breakout season for the Duke Blue Devils heading into this year. Vincent Anthony had 7.5 career sacks, which is not bad. And I believe he was coming off a 5-sack season in 2024, if memory serves correct, when I was doing the research heading into this podcast. But through 4 games in 2025, Vincent Anthony leads the ACC in sacks with 5 of them. So Rickie Collins and this offensive line, they definitely need to be aware of where Vincent Anthony is on the field at all times, because he's going to be rushing off the edge. You might want to double team him as much as humanly possible. Can't expect that every single down and distance he's going to be double teamed, but if and when Duke decides to bring 4 or less, or 5 or less really, he should have multiple guys on him, whether it's chipping with a tight end, using a running back for help, or just sliding the protection to have multiple offensive linemen on him. Bottom line is, a guy like Vincent Anthony definitely need to be aware of where he is on the field, because he can get to the passer as good as anyone in the ACC. What do you guys think? Do you think Rickie Collins is going to have a good day on Saturday against this Duke defense? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we'll go over the Duke offense and the challenge that lies ahead. Stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. This episode is brought to you by Square, your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. These local spots are what make the neighborhood feel like home, and so many of them run on Square. I've always talked about here so far. Salt City Coffee over on University Avenue, great place to go get coffee, especially on game days. And Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square, see you in the neighborhood. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited about it. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands is amazing. There's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets for these games can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices just inexplicably jumping at the checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. That's right, back to you. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you're going to pay. And honestly, Game Time, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. This is the Locked On Syracuse podcast. I'm Jackson Holzer. And before we continue this discussion about the Duke Blue Devils, we're about to get into this Duke offense and the challenge for this Syracuse defense after a pretty nice performance against Clemson on Saturday. I just want to shout out all of you who continue to subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. You all are truly the best. And if you haven't done so already, please feel free, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow to reach all Syracuse Orange fans. Of course, your support is amazing and it truly means a ton. Thank you all so much. Now let's continue the conversation. Jackson, tell us about this Duke offense. Can this Syracuse defense rise to the occasion just like it did last Saturday against the Clemson Tigers? Well, I'm here to tell you right now that it's not going to be easy. Now, if you look at the stat sheet, go to ACCFootball.com and you look at all the ACC stats, you'll notice that the totals for Duke are not exactly great. They're bottom of the ACC in a lot of the categories, like total yards and scoring, passing offense, rushing offense. They're not exactly good on the stat sheet. So, Jackson, why are you saying that this Duke offense is good? I'm glad you asked, because I feel like with Duke, it's a lot of self-inflicted wounds. And we'll get into what happened with them last week against NC State, but that seemed to be the game where everything came together for this Duke Blue Devils offense. In week one, they came out flat in the first half against Elon, but they eventually figured it out in the second half. Still, it's an SCS opponent in Elon. I mean, you should be able to figure it out from start to finish, just like Syracuse was able to do against Colgate. Then in week two, Duke was able to move the football against Illinois. They had 438 total yards in that game. I think that's pretty good, having well over 400 yards in a game. Problem with Duke is that they had 5 turnovers, which just cannot happen. You're not going to win many games turning the ball over 5 times, especially against a team like Illinois. And then in week 3, Duke had 450 total yards against them. But the first 5 possessions were this: 3 and out, a missed field goal, turnover on downs, and an interception. So they got off to a poor start. They recovered for the rest of the game, but it was too little too late against Tulane. And then in week 4, everything seemed to come together. 45 points for the Duke Blue Devils, 0 turnovers, over 400 total yards. So they're coming into this game on Saturday feeling pretty good about themselves. And they're led by their quarterback in Darian Mensah. You may have heard of Darian Mensah. If you haven't heard of Darian Mensah, I can tell you a little bit about him. He is a Tulane transfer, and he makes reportedly about $4 million in NIL. That's more than I make per year. I mean, let's be honest, probably more than you and I and everyone else that's paying attention to this podcast is making. So much so, $4 million a year, he is one of, if not the highest paid player in college football right now. Yes, that's right. The Duke Blue Devils football team gave Darian Mensah all of the money this offseason to transfer from Tulane. And guess what, folks? Whether or not he's worth the money or not, that's neither here nor there. That's not really the point of this conversation. The point of the conversation is that I don't care if he's making $0, if he's making $10 million, who cares? He's a really, really good quarterback. 67% completion percentage, over 1,300 passing yards, 11 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions through 4 games. So even though the Duke Blue Devils right now are 2-2, Darian Mensah is holding up his end of the bargain. He is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the best quarterback that Syracuse has faced since week 1 against Joey Aguilar. And we did not know in week 1 that Joey Aguilar was going to be as good as he has been this season. Turns out he is really good. That was a question mark heading into that game. Following that up, Joe Fagnano over at UConn. Colgate had their guy. We know that he's not better than anyone Syracuse has faced. Cade Klubnik. It's not 2024 Cade Klubnik, so he ain't very good. Darian Mensah is the best quarterback that Syracuse has faced since week 1 in Joey Aguilar. He's not exactly a runner, but he is pretty mobile. He can get outside the pocket, make all the throws. He's accurate, generally does make good decisions. So it's going to be very difficult for Syracuse's defense to try to contain Darian Mensah. Now, the silver lining behind that is perhaps Syracuse can get its pass rush going in this game because Duke in 4 games has allowed 7 sacks, which is towards the bottom of the ACC. As far as Duke's running game is concerned, they do not have one specific bell cow back. But they do use a lot of running backs. They rotate 3 of them. Specifically, you got Anderson Castle, Nate Shepard, Jaquez Moore. All 3 of these players have rushed for at least 100 yards and over 4 yards per carry. In fact, Castle actually averages nearly 9 yards per carry, and Shepard averages 6.5 yards per carry. So they're all pretty effective running backs. As far as the wide receivers are concerned, who Darian Mensah is throwing the football to, he's got plenty of options as well. The number 1 guy is Cooper Barkgate, 4 games, 17 catches for 337 yards. That yardage total is 3rd in the conference so far this season. He's a grad transfer from Harvard who has done a pretty nice job of translating his play from Harvard to the ACC, averaging nearly 20 yards per catch as well. So this is someone who can definitely stretch the field for the Duke Blue Devils. The other passing targets are no slouches either. You got Fran Brown, Shamir Higgins, Andrew Anthony, all very capable receiving threats for the Duke Blue Devils. So bottom line is that the Syracuse secondary as well is going to have its hands full containing all the weapons that Duke has, combined with them having one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC in Darian Mensah, definitely pacing to an all-conference campaign this year. So Duke's offense in general, I know if you look at the overall totals, they're towards the bottom of the ACC. They're towards the bottom. That is a fact. But they still have some really good players, and they have a really, really good quarterback. So this Syracuse defense is going to have to be on its A game. Otherwise, this is the type of matchup between Syracuse and Duke that it would not shock me if both teams, you ready for this, can get to 40 points. Wouldn't surprise me at all if the winner of this game, it's 45-42. Something along those lines. I don't necessarily know who's going to win. The good news is I'm not making my prediction just yet here on Locked On Syracuse. So that's it for this Duke discussion point of the podcast. Rickie Collins' first start against the Duke defense. We just went over the Duke offense. Now coming up, the ACC is switching their schedule a little bit. It is now a 9-game conference schedule. We'll go over what this means for Syracuse specifically next on Locked On Syracuse. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. The ACC has moved to a 9-game conference schedule. Let's go over what this means for Syracuse football. Well, first, let's dive into some of the logistics behind the ACC moving to a 9-game conference schedule. When is this going to kick in? Glad you asked. Based on what I'm reading, it sounds like it's going to be for 2027, but it could be for as soon as next year, 2026. And we'll go over it, exactly what this means for Syracuse in a moment. But regardless, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle, regardless of what year this kicks in for the ACC for Syracuse, as far as their scheduling, which we'll detail very, very soon. Also, as part of the 9-game conference schedule, the ACC is requiring every ACC team to play one additional game against a Power 4 opponent, and I also believe, or Notre Dame. So a Power 4 opponent that includes Notre Dame as well, because Notre Dame, of course, is an independent program. We're going to go over this from a Syracuse angle, and the good news for you all, ladies and gentlemen, is you can actually check out future schedules for Syracuse football, fbschedules.com. So let's say the ACC future scheduling does in fact kick in for 2026. The good news is that Syracuse football is playing Notre Dame at home in 2026, which would satisfy the requirement of playing a Power 4 conference team or Notre Dame, because you are playing Notre Dame. However, I think Cuse would probably have to drop one of their other non-conference games that they have scheduled so far to accommodate for the fact that they are now going to need to add an extra ACC game. So the other non-conference games that they are playing in 2026 are New Hampshire, Toledo, or at UConn. My guess is that if Syracuse needs to drop a game, it would probably be Toledo or going on the road to face UConn. The reasoning behind that is because New Hampshire is an FCS opponent, and I'd imagine Syracuse wants to keep an FCS opponent on their schedule. So that's what happens if the future scheduling kicks in as soon as 2026, but most likely it'll kick in for 2027. The good news is that Syracuse football already has its Power 4 non-conference opponent scheduled. They're going on the road at Penn State that season, which I believe is scheduled for week 2 of 2027. The other non-conference game for Syracuse that year is, I believe, going on the road at UConn. So in theory, Syracuse football could just drop UConn in 2026 if need be, because they're going to UConn in 2027. Syracuse, of course, in 2027 still would need another ACC opponent, which I believe the ACC will take care of for them. And they would also need to add one more non-conference opponent to that schedule, given that their Power 4 team that they are playing that year is on the road against Penn State. I'd imagine that Syracuse football is going to look to add a cupcake to that schedule, probably an FCS opponent, which, my guess, honestly, I think that might be week 1. Syracuse football decides to add it, because Penn State is scheduled for September 4th, which would be week 2. So who are you going to play in week 1? Well, you could just go with an FCS opponent, and that is your week 1 matchup right there in 2027. So the ACC moving to a 9-game conference slate with an additional game against a Power 4 opponent or Notre Dame. That is what it means for Syracuse football. Now, as far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future, working on setting up a crossover podcast with the host of Locked On Duke Blue Devils, JJ Jackson. In fact, we actually already have a recording time scheduled for tomorrow, so that episode may be out tomorrow, but it would be later than 6 p.m., or that could just serve as the Thursday podcast. And what we could do is Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 keys for Syracuse football to beat the Duke Blue Devils. Don't worry, I will let you all know on social media what the plan is at LO_Syracuse on Twitter. So that's what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the near future. And folks, it's another big moment here on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. And if you can just do me this quick favor, since you've already made it this far in the podcast, I hope that means you enjoy Locked On Syracuse. And if so, just tell 1 or 2 of your closest Syracuse friends about the Locked On Syracuse podcast so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all again soon.